Purification translates as tahara in Arabic and literally means removing an impurity. Islamic jurisprudence distinguishes two aspects, impurity and the state of impurity. Purification consists of getting rid of an impurity and changing a state called impurity in reference to bodily purity and spiritual purity. Note that impurity, material, defiles only three elements: the body, the clothes and the place of worship. In Arabic, the word wudu literally means purity, or beauty. It is used to designate small ablutions, cf. Section 3.1 and Section 3.2. Legally, small ablutions consist in purifying well-defined members with water, some of them having been washed or over which one passes one's wet hands. The merits. Concerning the merits of purification, we note the approval of Allah in the first place, since He affirms in Surah 2 in verse 222 to love those who repent and who purify themselves. Furthermore, our beloved Master the Prophet said, "Whoever performs ablution and beautifies it, all his sins will leave his body even out of his fingernails." He also affirmed that Allah does not accept any prayer performed without ablution, hence the importance of purification. The different ablutions. Wet ablutions. How to perform wet ablution. Wet ablution, with water, consists of several steps. Here they are in order. Brush your teeth if possible. Invoke the name of Allah, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Stand in the direction of Mecca if possible. If an open container is used, stand to the right of the container. Use only the bare minimum of water. Wash your hands up to the wrists 3 times. Wash his mouth using his index finger 3 times. Wash the nostrils by inhaling and exhaling water 3 times. Wash your face 3 times. Wash the forearms up to and including the elbows 3 times, starting with the right then the left. Run her wet hands through her hair. Run your wet hands simultaneously over your ears. Wash your feet up to your knees. Pronounce the Shahada to close the ablutions. It is tolerated to pass his wet hand on his shoes, during a next ablution, on the condition of having worn them immediately after his wet ablutions. This act can be repeated as many times as necessary for 3 days for the traveler and 1 day for the resident only if they have not taken off their shoes. In which case, it will be necessary before to redo its wet ablutions. As for people who have bandages on one of the limbs concerned by the ablutions, they have 3 choices: either they perform their ablutions normally, excluding the limb covered with the bandage, or they pass their hands symbolically over it, or finally they resort to dry ablutions. Cancellation of ablution. It is important to know the elements that cancel ablution to avoid finding oneself in a state of impurity through ignorance. The items that nullify ablution are as follows: the vomit, disbelief, loss of reason or epileptic seizure, fainting, the exit of all substances or gases through the 2 orifices, sexual pleasure, heavy sleep, contact with a person of the opposite sex, in the Chafite school, the doubt, the blood, the important gurgling of the belly, the touching of one's sex, except at the Hanafi school, everything that goes in and then comes out of the body. Dry ablutions. Called tayammum, dry ablution consists of performing small or large ablutions without the use of water. They can be done only in case of absence of water or circumstances making it impossible or very difficult to use water. How to perform dry ablution. The process is simple. All you need to do is passing your hands over an earth element preserved in its natural form, sand, rock, etc. Then pass his hands over his face and rub them each to the wrists. There is another method practiced by Malikites and Hanbalites. Run your hands over an earth element preserved in its natural form, sand, rock, etc. Run your hands over your face. Pass your hands over the previously used item. Finally run his hands over his forearms to the elbows. These two visions are valid since they are reported by the Prophet. Note, in the event that one realizes that there is the possibility of performing ablutions with water while one was performing the prayer with dry ablutions, one must interrupt the prayer. Then do it again after performing wet ablution. The Great Ablutions. God says, "And if you are in a state of impurity, then purify yourselves." S.5v.6. Great ablution is performed as a result of one of the following causes. Death. We then speak of mortuary washing. After or before converting as desired. After the total cessation of periods or lochia for women. After ejaculation and whatever the circumstances. After any penetration even if it is not followed by an ejaculation. Apart from these cases, there are circumstances where it is desirable for the believer to perform great ablution such as after performing a mortuary washing, before the Friday prayer and that of the two major feasts, before putting themselves in a state of sacralization for the pilgrimage. Note, it is not necessary to redo the ablutions, wet or dry, after the great ablutions because they replace them. Certain rituals are prohibited when one is in a state of major impurity, prayer or tawaf around the Kaaba and reciting the Quran or touching it according to certain ulamas. How to do great ablution. There are two ways to do great ablution. The first, the simplest, is to pass water all over your body, of course, with the intention of doing so for the major ablution ritual. The disadvantage of this method is the obligation to still make small ablutions before praying. The second way is sort of a combination of showering and performing minor ablutions. In this way, one can perform the prayer without redoing one's minor ablutions. Here is how to do it. Wash your hands up to the wrists. Wash the part of his body between the navel and the knees at the front and at the back. Wash your mouth, nose, face, hands to forearms once. Wash your hair 3 times, making sure to wet it well, then your ears. Wash your whole body starting with the right side then the left. Wash his feet and between his toes. Finally pronounce the Shahada. The mortuary washing. The washing of the deceased is an obligation. It should be done as soon as possible. It takes place exactly like the major ablutions. On the other hand, one must first close the eyes of the deceased, cut his nails, shave his pubic hair and those of the armpits, place him preferably on a raised surface, finally undress him, leaving his private parts covered. At the end of washing, we can braid the hair of the deceased if necessary. Purification after his needs. It is mandatory to clean your private parts after defecating by any means, toilet paper for example, but it is preferable to use water for better hygiene. Nothing prevents use both. Certain rules must be respected. Take your time. Start by washing the genitals before washing the anus in the case of stools. Wash with the left hand. For men, do not touch their genitals with their right hand when urinating. Body cleanliness. Body cleanliness, in other words the maintenance of the growth of nails and hair, remains a prophetic recommendation. It consists of taking care to remove hair regularly from the armpits, the pubic hair, to reduce one's mustache or beard, to cut one's nails and finally to circumcise oneself. Eyebrow waxing is prohibited. On the other hand, waxing of the legs, back, chest, hands and feet is not prohibited for women. In men, it can represent a lack of virility. Frequency of hair removal. Anas says, a periodicity of 40 nights has been set for us for mustache reduction, nail cutting, armpit hair removal and pubic hair shaving, reported by Muslim, Ibn Majah, Ahmad, Al-Tarmi, An-Nasai and Abu Dawud.